In the heart of the Arizona territory where the sun burns secrets into the dust, a woman from Boston found herself very, very lost. Her name was Josephine Bowman, a painter of flowers, a woman of science, completely unprepared for a world stained red with blood and baked by a relentless sun. She had been warned about the cougars and the snakes. She had been warned about the Chiricahua. But no one had warned her about the man who was a piece of the landscape itself, a ghost carved from the red rock. He was a giant of a man, forged in the fire between two worlds, an Apache warrior with the eyes of a hawk and a past as scarred as the canyons he called home. And when he found her, his warning wasn't about the dangers of the desert. It was about the beast inside himself. "I can't control myself around you," he growled, the words a promise of danger and a confession he never wanted to make. This is the story of what happened next. The heat in late May was a living thing. It pressed on Josephine's shoulders, stole the breath from her lungs, and made the air shimmer like a mirage. Her muslin dress, the most practical thing she owned, was a sweat-stained ruin. In Boston, a lady did not perspire. Here it was proof you were still breathing. She dabbed her brow, her eyes fixed on the ghost-white petals of a sacred datura flower, a miracle of life in the rust-colored soil. She opened her sketchbook, her charcoal stick moving with practiced grace. For the Bartlett Botanical Society back east, these were scientific records. For her, they were a ticket out of a gilded cage, an escape into a world that was raw, honest, and terrifyingly real. Sheriff Miller had warned her, a man whose belly entered a room a full 2 seconds before he did. "Ma'am, you stick to the town limits," he'd said, wagging a fat finger. "It ain't just the sun that'll kill you. The Chiricahua, they ain't fond of us setting up shop on their land." But the best specimens, the ones that fought for life with a tenacity she admired, weren't in the dusty street of Prosperity Springs. They were out here. A twig snapped. It was sharp, deliberate. Not a lizard, not a coyote. Josephine's heart hammered against her ribs. She closed her sketchbook, her senses screaming. The drone of insects, the smell of sun-baked creosote, it all vanished, replaced by a thick, predatory silence. She stood up slowly, scanning the skeletal rock formations around her. Nothing. "It's just your city nerves," she told herself. She took a step back toward the path, and that's when she saw him. He wasn't just a man. He was a part of the canyon she had somehow missed. He stood beside a towering saguaro, so still he could have been carved from the rock. He was enormous, not just tall, but broad, with shoulders that strained the seams of his buckskin shirt. His hair was long and black, a stark river against the bronze of his skin. But it was his face that stole her breath. High cheekbones, a strong jaw that spoke of his Apache blood, and his eyes. His eyes were a startling, piercing shade of hazel green, a feature so out of place it was mesmerizing. They were the eyes of a hunter, and they were locked on her. He held a long, unstrung bow in one massive hand. A quiver of arrows was slung across his back. He was the danger she'd been warned about, made of flesh and blood and silent fury. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through her. But she didn't scream. Her Boston propriety, it seemed, was the last thing to abandon her. She just stood there, frozen, clutching her sketchbook to her chest like a flimsy shield. He took a step forward, his moccasins silent on the gravelly earth. He moved like a panther, a liquid grace that defied his size. As he got closer, she saw the details. A faded scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the powerful muscles of his forearms, the complete lack of welcome in his expression. "You are far from your town," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. It wasn't the broken English she'd heard from other natives in town. His words were clear, measured, with a deep timbre that vibrated in the air between them. I, I am a botanist," she managed, her own voice a reedy whisper. "I'm studying the local flora." He glanced at her sketchbook, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "There are flowers that bite back in this land. You should not be here alone." "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," she said, a flash of defiance cutting through her fear. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone as quickly as it came. "The rattlesnake does not ask if you are capable before it strikes. The mountain lion does not ask permission to be hungry." He took another step, closing the distance. The sheer scale of him was overwhelming. He smelled of pine, leather, and the wild, clean scent of the desert itself. Your kind is not welcome in these hills. My kind? Josephine bristled. I am not a miner tearing up the land or a rancher stealing water. I am here to appreciate its beauty, to document it. His strange light eyes narrowed. They roamed over her, from the stray strands of auburn hair escaping her bonnet to the sensible but scuffed leather boots on her feet. It wasn't a lecherous gaze, but it was intensely personal. An assessment so thorough she felt he could see the frantic beat of her heart right through her dress. Beauty is a dangerous thing to hunt, he said, his voice dropping even lower. For the hunter and for the hunted. He paused and the air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with Apache raids. It was something else, something primal and unnerving. Go back to your town, city woman, and do not come back. You have no right to tell me where I can and cannot go, she retorted, though her bravado was a flimsy thing. He took the final step, and now he loomed over her. She had to crane her neck to look up into that carved face. She saw the war in his hazel green eyes, a battle between raw instinct and iron control. His hands, large and calloused, clenched into fists at his sides. You don't understand, he growled, the sound vibrating in his chest. I am giving you a warning, the only one you will get. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a confession torn from him against his will. It is not just the animals or my people you should fear. He held her gaze, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. It is me. I can't control myself around you. The part of me that is a man, it is not the part that is in charge out here. With that, he turned. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply melted back into the landscape, as silent and sudden as he had appeared. Josephine was left standing alone, her heart hammering against her ribs, the scent of him still hanging in the air, and his terrifying, intimate warning echoing in the profound silence of the desert. Returning to Prosperity Springs was like stepping from a vibrant, dangerous painting into a drab, smudged sketch. The town's name was a cruel joke. The only thing prospering here was the wallet of a man named Bart Corian. Josephine hid in her small room above the mercantile, the smell of milled flour and cured tobacco a constant reminder of her confinement. She laid out her sketchbook, but the image of the datura flower seemed lifeless. Her mind was filled with the image of a giant, the stark contrast of his dark hair and light eyes, the memory of a voice that felt like the earth itself speaking. I can't control myself around you. The words were a brand on her thoughts. It wasn't a simple threat of violence. It was more complex, more disturbing. It was a warning from a man at war with himself. And for some reason, she was the battlefield. The next evening, she was reminded of the other kind of danger, the kind that wore a tailored suit and a predatory smile. Bartholomew Bart Corian owned the largest cattle ranch, the only saloon, and by extension, Sheriff Miller. He was a man of medium height with a thickening waistline, but he carried himself like a king in his small kingdom. His pale blue eyes assessed everyone and everything for its value. He cornered her as she left the mercantile, tipping his expensive Stetson hat. Miss Beaumont, a pleasure to see you looking so radiant. Mr. Corian, she replied, her tone clipped. She tried to step around him, but he blocked her path. I hear you were out sketching near the canyons again, he said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Sheriff Miller tells me he's warned you. It's a dangerous pastime. I am aware of the risks. Are you? He leaned closer, his voice dropping. He smelled of whiskey and expensive cigars, a cloying scent that made her stomach clench. There are savages out there, Miss Beaumont, filthy animals. A woman like you, a woman of refinement and beauty. You're like a ripe peach in a pigsty. They wouldn't know what to do with you. His implication was vile, and it infuriated her. It was so different from the Apache's warning. Corian's words were an insult, a threat meant to cow her, to make her dependent on his protection. The giant's warning had been a raw admission of his own fractured humanity. I assure you, Mr. Corian, I am not a piece of fruit, she said, her voice sharp as ice, and I find your concern for my welfare to be as stifling as this heat. She pushed past him, her back rigid. She could feel his eyes on her, a proprietary gaze that made her skin crawl. In that moment, she understood. The cage of Boston society she'd fled had merely been replaced by another. This one built of dust, prejudice, and the ambitions of a petty tyrant. She had to know more about the man in the canyon. Her chance came a few days later when she went to have a buckle on her satchel mended by the town blacksmith, Walter Pike. Walter was a quiet, sinewy man with kind eyes and arms like knotted oak. His wife, Martha, a woman with worry etched into the lines of her face, often sat with him. "Heard Bart Corian was bothering you again," Walter said, not looking up from the clang and rhythm of his work. "Is there anything that happens in this town that isn't common knowledge by supper?" Josephine sighed. Martha Pike looked up from her sewing. "People talk, dear, especially about a woman like you. You're different, educated, from the East, and you're alone." She lowered her voice. "And Bart Corian doesn't like things he can't own." "I have no intention of being owned," Josephine stated firmly. "Be careful," Martha whispered, her eyes darting toward the street. "He's a vindictive man." As Walter finished the repair, Josephine tried to sound casual. "Walter, I saw someone out in the canyons, an Apache, but he was different, very tall, with light-colored eyes." The hammering stopped. Walter set his tools down with a deliberate quiet. He exchanged a heavy, meaningful look with Martha. "You saw Coker," Walter said, his voice flat. He wouldn't meet her gaze. "Coker? It means fire in their tongue," he explained. "Best you stay away from him, Miss Beaumont. He's neither one thing nor the other, and that's the most dangerous thing a man can be out here." "What do you mean?" she pressed. Martha took over, her voice barely a whisper. "His father was a white trapper. A mountain of a man named Jedediah Kane came through here 20-odd years ago. Took up with an Apache woman. Kosher is what came of it. When Kane died of a fever, her people wouldn't fully accept the boy because of his father's blood. And the folks in this town," she trailed off. "Well, they only see his mother's," Walter finished, finally looking at her. His eyes were full of a grim pity. "He walks alone, trades pelts for supplies when he has to, but he keeps to the mountains. Some say he's a spirit, a ghost of the canyon. Others say he's a devil." He paused, his gaze hardening. "Bart Corian just says he's a half-breed squatter on land that could be grazed by cattle, land that Corian has wanted for a very long time." The pieces clicked into place. The perfect English, the warring conflict in his eyes, the solitude. He was an outcast from two worlds, belonging to neither, and she, in her own way, felt a pang of recognition. She too was an outcast, fleeing a world she didn't fit into, trying to find her place in another that didn't want her. Her fascination with the giant of the canyon deepened, transforming from fear and curiosity into a dangerous, compelling empathy. He was not the faceless savage Corian described. He was a man named Coker, and Josephine Beaumont had never been good at heeding warnings. A week later, the brittle piece of Prosperity Springs shattered. A prospector, a grizzled old-timer named Silas Croft, was found dead 10 miles north of town. An arrow was buried deep in his chest, an Apache arrow. The town, always simmering with a low-grade fear, boiled over. Bart Corian seized the moment. Standing on the porch of his saloon, his voice boomed across the dusty street. "I've warned you!" he roared to the crowd of miners, ranchers, and townsfolk. "We've been patient, but the savage knows no peace. They murder old Silas for his mule and a sack of beans. How long before they come for our homes? For our women and children?" A murmur of angry agreement rippled through the crowd. Men gripped the pistols at their hips, their faces grim. "It's that half-breed," a man shouted. "The one they call Coker. He's been seen near the North Canyons." "He's the one," another agreed. "He's big enough to have done it himself. No war party needed." Josephine stood at the edge of the crowd, her blood running cold. They were condemning him without a shred of proof, fueled by prejudice and Corian's inflammatory words. She remembered Coker's eyes, the profound loneliness in them. He was not a murderer. She felt it with a certainty that defied all logic. Sheriff Miller, sweating under Corian's watchful eye, tried to placate the mob. "Now hold on. We don't know for sure who did it. And Coker is half Chiricahua," Corian bellowed, silencing the sheriff. "He's their eyes and ears, I say we form a posse and drag him in. We'll have our own justice if the law is too cowardly to act." A roar of approval went up. Josephine felt sick. This wasn't about justice for Silas Croft. This was a land grab, an excuse to eliminate the man who stood between Corian and the territory he craved. She had to do something. Pushing her way through the angry men, she stood before Corian on the saloon steps. "You have no proof," she said, her voice clear and steady, ringing with an authority that momentarily surprised the crowd into silence. Corian looked down at her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Miss Beaumont, defending the local wildlife again. An arrow is proof enough for me." "An arrow could have been fired by anyone," she insisted, "even a white man looking to stir up trouble. You cannot condemn a man based on rumor and hatred." A man in the crowd spat on the ground. "She's a squaw lover." The insult hit her like a physical blow. The crowd, which had once regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and respect, now looked at her with suspicion and contempt. Corian's smirk widened. He had won. He had not only turned the mob against Coker, but he had also successfully isolated her, marking her as a sympathizer, an outsider. "The lady has a soft heart," Corian said condescendingly, "but our hearts can't be soft when our lives are on the line. The posse rides at dawn." Defeated, Josephine retreated, the hostile stares of the townsfolk following her. She knew what a posse meant. It wasn't about an arrest. It was about a lynching. They wouldn't bring Coker back for a trial. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind howled, a mournful sound that seemed to carry the town's bloodlust on its currents. She paced her small room, her mind racing. She couldn't let them kill him. It wasn't just about justice. It was about the flicker of connection she'd felt in the canyon, the recognition of a fellow solitary soul. A desperate, reckless plan formed in her mind. The sensible Bostonian part of her screamed in protest. But the woman who had crossed a continent to find freedom could not stand by and watch an innocent man be hunted like an animal. Before the first hint of dawn, Josephine, dressed in her sturdiest riding skirt, packed a satchel with water, biscuits, and her sketchbook, and slipped out of the sleeping town. She saddled the mare she rented from the livery, her movements swift and silent in the pre-dawn gloom. She was going to find him. She was going to warn him. She rode north into the vast, silent wilderness. The land was an alien world in the pale moonlight, the shapes of the cacti and rock formations twisted and strange. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. But her fear for Coker's life was greater than her fear of the dark. She had no idea where he lived, only the general area where she had first seen him. As the sun began to rise, bathing the landscape in hues of soft pink and orange, a profound sense of hopelessness washed over her. The territory was immense. Finding one man in it was an impossible task. Yet she pressed on, driven by an unshakable conviction. She was scanning the horizon, looking for any sign, a wisp of smoke, a footprint, when the world suddenly tilted. The ground beneath her mare gave way with a sickening lurch. The horse shrieked in terror as they plunged downwards. Josephine was thrown from the saddle, her head striking something hard. The last thing she saw before darkness swallowed her whole was a shower of dirt and rock and the terrified rolling eye of her horse as it fell away from her into the abyss. Pain was the first thing to greet her, a dull, throbbing ache at the back of her head. The second was the smell of wood smoke and sage. Josephine's eyelids fluttered open. She wasn't in the dusty wash where she'd fallen. She was lying on a pallet of soft furs in a room built of dark, sturdy logs. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting a warm, dancing light across the single room. The space was Spartan but meticulously clean. Tanned hides were stacked neatly in a corner. Dried herbs hung from the rafters. A longbow and quiver rested against the wall. A breeze drifted through the open doorway, carrying the crisp, clean scent of the high country. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness sent her falling back onto the furs. "Be still." The voice came from the shadows near the hearth. Coker stepped into the light. He was stripped to the waist, his magnificent scarred torso gleaming in the firelight. He held a damp cloth in one hand. He moved to her side, his presence filling the small cabin, making the air feel thick and charged. "You have a hard head," he said, his voice a low rumble. He knelt beside her, his proximity making her heart pound. "The horse was not so lucky. Its leg is broken." The news hit her with a pang of guilt. "Oh, the poor thing." "I ended its suffering," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for sentimentality. His gaze was intense as he gently dabbed the cool cloth against the lump on her head. His touch was surprisingly tender for a man of his size and power. His fingers brushed against her temple, and an unexpected jolt, like lightning, shot through her. She flinched, not from pain, but from the shock of the sensation. His hand immediately recoiled as if burned. He stood up, putting distance between them, his back muscles tightening. "What were you doing?" he demanded, his voice rougher now. "Riding alone into the canyons before dawn. Are you trying to die?" "My shuddersum." "I was looking for you," she said, her voice small. "To warn you." He turned to face her, his hazel eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Warn me?" "There's a posse from the town. A prospector, Silas Croft, was found dead, killed by an Apache arrow. They're blaming you. Bart Corian is leading them. They rode out at dawn." He listened, his expression unchanging, a mask of stone. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "Corian," he finally said the name, a bitter taste in his mouth. "He has wanted this land for a long time. My being on it is an inconvenience. Silas's death is a gift to him. You have to run. They're not planning to arrest you. They're coming to kill you." "Run where?" he asked, a raw, weary anger in his voice. He swept a hand around the small cabin. "This is the only place I have. The Chiricahua see me as a white man. The white men see me as an Apache. To run is to have no ground to stand on at all. I will not run." His defiance was magnificent but terrifying. "Then you'll fight them all alone?" "I have been alone my entire life," he stated as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. He turned his gaze back to her, and the intensity in his eyes was back, the internal war raging. "The bigger question is what I am to do with you." The air grew heavy again. His warning from their first encounter hung unspoken between them. "I can't control myself around you." Now she was here, in his home, injured and utterly dependent on him. The wildness he had warned her about was a palpable force in the confines of the cabin. "You're trapped here," he said, his voice a low growl. "The fall you took, you landed in the mouth of a dry wash. Yesterday's rain in the high peaks is coming down. By midday, that wash will be a raging river. No one can get in or out for at least a day, not even Corian's men." She was stranded with him. The thought sent a tremor of fear and a bewildering flicker of something else, something akin to anticipation through her. "I didn't ask for you to come here," he said, his voice strained. He began to pace the small space like a caged wolf. "I told you to stay away. I warned you. I couldn't let them murder you," she whispered, watching him. He stopped, his back to her, and gripped the log wall, his knuckles turning white. He seemed to be physically wrestling with some unseen demon. "Your sense of justice is going to get you killed, or worse." He turned slowly, his eyes blazing with a desperate, raw emotion that stole her breath. "Do you have any idea what it is like to be near you? To smell the soap on your skin from 10 yards away? To see the color of your hair in the sun? I have spent years crushing the man my father was out of myself. The part that wants things, a home, a wife. But when I see you, it all comes roaring back. And it is a rage, not a comfort. It is a hunger I cannot feed." His confession was brutal, poetic, and terrifying. He was laying himself bare, showing her the jagged edges of his soul. He was warning her again, but this time it was not a threat but a plea. A plea for her to understand the danger she was in, not from his malice, but from his own tormented humanity. "I am not your enemy, Coker," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. He gave a harsh, short laugh, devoid of humor. "You are the most dangerous thing that has ever walked into my life, Josephine Bowman, and now you are locked in here with me." He looked at her, his green eyes burning with a terrible fire. "May whatever God you pray to have mercy on us both." The day passed in a state of suspended tension. The distant roar of water rushing through the wash was a constant reminder of their isolation. Coker was a restless storm within the cabin's walls. He moved with a contained energy, checking his weapons, reinforcing the door with a thick wooden bar, scanning the ridgeline from the cover of the doorway. He said little, but his silence was a living thing, filled with everything he wasn't saying. Josephine's head still ached, but she forced herself to sit up, wrapping one of the soft furs around her shoulders. She watched him, studying the economy of his motion, the profound competence he radiated. He was a man perfectly in tune with his environment, yet she was an element he could not account for, a disruption to his solitary world. As dusk began to settle, he finally seemed to relax his vigil. He built up the fire and placed a small pot over the flames. The aroma of simmering meat and wild herbs soon filled the cabin. He served her a portion in a wooden bowl. It was a simple rabbit stew, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the now receding rumble of the floodwaters. My father, Jedediah, built this cabin, Coker said suddenly, his gaze fixed on the flames. He built it for my mother, Tala. He thought he could carve out a piece of the world for them here, a place that wasn't Apache and wasn't white, but just theirs. Josephine listened, holding her breath, knowing this was a rare gift. He was a good man, Coker continued, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Strong. He taught me to track and hunt, but also to read and write. He had a crate of books he'd hauled across the country. Shakespeare, the Bible, Marcus Aurelius. He said a man needed to know how to feed his body and his mind. He gestured with his chin towards a small, worn, leather-bound book on a shelf. That was his. And your mother? Josephine asked gently. A flicker of pain crossed his face. She was like a desert flower, beautiful, strong, but she couldn't thrive in a cage, even a loving one. She missed her people, the songs, the ceremonies. After my father died, she tried to take me back to them. But I had his eyes, his height. The other children tormented me. The elders looked at me with suspicion. We didn't belong. She faded day by day. The winter after he passed, a sickness took her. He fell silent, the story hanging in the air, thick with loss. Josephine's heart ached for the boy he must have been, doubly orphaned and triply outcast. So you stayed here, she murmured, alone. This is all I have of them, he said, looking around the cabin. The smell of the wood, the stones he set in the hearth. It's enough. His confession cracked open the armor she wore as well. She found herself telling him of Boston, of the suffocating expectations, of the arranged marriage her father had planned for her to a man twice her age with cold, clammy hands. He saw me as a broodmare to secure his legacy, she said, the bitterness still sharp. My passion for botany, for art, he called them charming hobbies that would have to be set aside for my duties as a wife. I felt like I was dying. Not a swift death like your mother's, but a slow, daily suffocation. So I took my inheritance from my grandmother, and I ran. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and for the first time, she didn't see a warrior or a tormented outcast. She saw a man who understood. We both ran, he said quietly, just to different kinds of wilderness. The understanding that passed between them was more intimate than any touch. The tension in the room shifted, the dangerous, predatory edge softening into something deeper and far more complicated. Later, as she lay on the fur pallet, pretending to sleep, she watched him. He sat by the fire, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape of steel on stone, a soothing sound. She was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid for him, and she was afraid of the burgeoning feeling in her own chest, a feeling as wild and untamable as the man himself. He stopped his work and stared into the fire. He was still fighting his war. But she realized now that the battle wasn't just against the primal instincts he feared. It was against the profound, terrifying pull of loneliness, a pull that was now drawing him, against his will, toward her. And she found herself being pulled in just the same. By morning, the floodwaters had receded. The air was clean-washed and cool. A fragile peace settled over the canyon, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Josephine's heart. Corian's men will be able to cross by this afternoon, Coker said, his voice once again brusque, businesslike. The vulnerability of the previous night was gone, locked away. They will search the low ground first. That gives us time. You need to be gone before they find this place. Gone where? She asked. I can't go back to Prosperity Springs. And what about you? You can't stay here. This is my home. I will defend it, he said with grim finality. I will take you south towards the old mission trail. From there, you can make your way to Tucson. It is a bigger town. You can disappear there. The thought of leaving, of never seeing him again, was a physical pain. But she saw the resolve in his eyes. He was pushing her away for her own safety, severing the connection before it could take root. It was a sacrifice, and she knew it. He provided her with a pouch of dried meat, a water skin, and a pair of his mother's old, soft moccasins that fit her surprisingly well. The journey down from the high country was arduous. Coker moved with a silent, breathtaking speed, but he would pause, waiting for her, extending a hand to help her over a difficult patch of rock. Each time his skin touched hers, a jolt went through her, and he would pull his hand back quickly, his jaw tight. They reached the mission trail by early afternoon. It was little more than a faint path winding through the mesquite. Below in the distance, they could see the dust cloud of a group of riders, the posse. They are moving faster than I thought, Coker said, his eyes narrowed. They have a skilled tracker. He turned to her. The moment she had been dreading was here. Follow this trail south, he commanded. Do not stop until you reach the Santa Cruz River. Follow it downstream. Do not light a fire. Do not trust anyone. Coker, she began, her voice thick with emotion. Go, he cut her off, his tone harsh. He couldn't look at her, staring instead at the approaching dust cloud. Your presence here endangers us both. Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded. She turned to leave, but hesitated. On impulse, she reached into her satchel and pulled out her sketchbook and charcoal. She ripped out a clean page, her hands moving quickly, sketching the proud, stubborn flower of a desert thistle, a plant that was beautiful but armed, thriving where nothing else could. She pressed it into his hand. He looked down at the drawing, his composure cracking for a fraction of a second. A flicker of profound emotion crossed his face before he mastered it. He didn't say a word. He just closed his large hand around the small piece of paper. With a final, heartbroken look, Josephine turned and ran down the trail, not daring to look back. She traveled for hours, her body aching, her mind replaying every moment in the cabin. As the sun began to set, she stumbled upon a small, hidden spring. She knew Kosher had told her not to stop, but she was exhausted. She had to rest. She was drinking from the cool water when she heard them. Horses, not from the direction of the posse, but from the west. 2 riders. Her heart leaped into her throat. She dove into the brush, praying they wouldn't see her. Through the leaves, she recognized them. It was Walter Pike, the blacksmith, and his wife, Martha, in a small buckboard wagon. Relief washed over her. They were kind people. They would help her. She stepped out from the brush. Walter! Martha! Martha Pike gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Walter pulled the horses to a halt, his face a mixture of shock and something else she couldn't read. Miss Beaumont! My word, we thought... The posse said you'd been taken, Martha cried. I'm all right. I fell. Coker, the man they're hunting, he helped me. Walter slowly got down from the wagon, his movements stiff. He avoided her eyes. Where is he now, Miss Beaumont? He's gone back to his cabin. Walter, you have to help me. The posse will kill him. He's innocent. Martha began to sob quietly into her handkerchief. Walter finally looked at Josephine, and his eyes were filled with a terrible, weary shame. They already know where the cabin is, he said, his voice heavy as lead. They're on their way there now. Josephine stared at him, confused. How? How could they possibly know? It's hidden so well. Walter's gaze flickered to his weeping wife, and in that instant, Josephine understood. The posse wasn't moving fast because they had a skilled tracker. They were moving fast because they had a map. Martha, Josephine whispered, the name catching in her throat. Martha Pike looked up, her face streaked with tears, a wretched mask of guilt and fear. I I had to, dear. I was so afraid. Bart Corian, he came to the smithy. He said he knew you'd gone to warn the half-breed. He said if you were found with him, they'd brand you a collaborator, that they'd treat you the same as they treated a squaw. He said the only way to prove our loyalty, to save you from that fate, was to tell him where the half-breed lived. The pieces fell into place. Walter had known the general location of Kosher's cabin from years of quiet trading. Under pressure from Corian, under threat of what would happen to Josephine, he had told his wife. And she, in a misguided, terrified attempt to save Josephine from scandal and ruin, had betrayed Coker to the one man who wanted him dead. He promised he'd bring him in for a fair trial, Martha wailed. He promised. But Josephine could see the truth in Walter's devastated eyes. Corian had never intended a trial. The kindness of Martha Pike, twisted by fear and prejudice, had just signed Coker's death warrant, and Josephine had led them all right to him. A cold, dreadful certainty seized her. There was no time for anger. Every second wasted was a second closer to Coker's death. "Turn this wagon around," she ordered Walter, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. "Miss Beaumont, you can't," Walter pleaded. "It's too late. Corian has 20 men with him." "I don't care if he has 100, she snapped, climbing onto the buckboard. "Coker saved my life. I will not stand by while he dies because of a lie and a betrayal. Turn it around, now." Perhaps it was the fire in her eyes or the weight of his own guilt, but Walter did as he was told. He whipped the horses, sending the wagon rattling back the way it had come, at a punishing pace. They drove with a desperate urgency, the setting sun casting long, bloody shadows across the landscape. As they drew closer to the canyons, the crisp evening air was tainted by the smell of smoke. Not the clean, pine-scented smoke of Coker's hearth, but the acrid smell of something burning that shouldn't be. They crested a ridge and saw it. Coker's cabin, nestled in its hidden valley, was surrounded. Corian's men were using the rocks and trees for cover, their rifles flashing in the deepening twilight. The cabin itself was under siege. Puffs of smoke erupted from the single window as Coker returned fire with a rifle of his own. They weren't trying to flush him out. They were trying to kill him. And they had set fire to the woodshed beside the cabin, the flames licking hungrily at the dry timber, threatening to spread to the cabin itself. "Fools," Walter muttered. "They'll burn the whole canyon down." Josephine's mind raced. They needed a diversion, something to give Coker a chance. Her eyes fell on the landscape, her botanist's mind cataloging the flora. Creosote, greasewood, dry grasses. The land itself was a tinderbox. "Walter," she said, her voice low and urgent. "The wind. It's picking up, blowing from the east towards them. If we could start another fire, behind them." Walter's eyes widened as he understood. A backfire. It was incredibly dangerous. "It could trap them," he breathed, "and us. It's a risk we have to take." Leaving Martha hidden with the wagon, Josephine and Walter crept down the backside of the ridge, carrying a small tinder box and a lit lantern. They moved through the darkness, the sounds of the gunfight growing louder, circling around behind the posse's position. The wind was a steady, dry river of air blowing straight towards Corian's men. "Here," Josephine whispered, pointing to a dense patch of greasewood. "This will go up fast." With trembling hands, Walter struck a match. The tiny flame caught, wavered, and then roared to life with terrifying speed. The dry brush ignited, and a wall of fire 10 feet high raced westward on the wind, directly towards the unsuspecting posse. Shouts of alarm rose from the men. "Fire! Behind us!" Their attention, once focused solely on the cabin, was now split. The organized siege dissolved into chaos as men scrambled to avoid being caught between Coker's rifle and the rapidly approaching flames. From his window, Coker saw his chance. The rifle fire from his window increased, its sharp cracks adding to the pandemonium. He wasn't shooting to kill. Josephine realized he was shooting with precision, forcing them back, herding them away from the fire. Corian, enraged, tried to rally his men. "Hold your ground, you cowards! Finish him!" But the fear of being burned alive was more potent than Corian's commands. His men broke ranks, fleeing into the darkness. In the fiery, chaotic aftermath, a single figure emerged from the cabin, moving low and fast. It was Coker. He ran not towards the trail, but deeper into the canyon, towards the sheer rock faces. "Coker!" Josephine screamed, breaking cover and running towards him. He turned, his face smudged with soot, his eyes blazing in the firelight. He saw her, and his expression was one of pure disbelief. "Josephine, what are you doing? I told you to run. I couldn't leave you," she cried, reaching him as Walter caught up. There was no time for explanations. The fire they had started was spreading, and the burning woodshed was about to set the cabin roof ablaze. "This way," Coker commanded, grabbing her arm. His grip was like iron but protective. "There is a passage my father found. It's the only way out now." He led them towards a sheer cliff face that looked impassable. But hidden behind a curtain of old man's beard lichen was a narrow fissure, a crack in the rock just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. He pushed them inside into the cool, damp darkness of the mountain itself. As he followed them in, the roof of his cabin finally caught fire, roaring into the night sky, consuming the only home he had ever known. They emerged from the rock passage onto a high, windswept mesa as the first light of dawn broke across the horizon. Below them, a pall of smoke hung over the canyon. The fire had burned itself out, leaving a blackened, ugly scar upon the land. The cabin was gone. All that remained was a single stone chimney, standing like a lonely tombstone against the morning sky. Kocher stood at the edge of the mesa, staring down at the ruin of his past. Everything his father had built, everything he had held on to, was ashes. Josephine's heart broke for him. She went to his side, her presence a silent offering of comfort. Walter Pike stood a respectful distance away, his head bowed in shame. Coker did not look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the smoke. "You should not have come back," he said, his voice flat. "They were going to kill you," she replied softly. "And it was my fault. Martha told me." "I know," he interrupted. He finally turned to look at her, and his eyes were not angry, but filled with a profound weariness. "Fear makes people do terrible things. Corian used her fear, just as he uses the town's. It is his greatest weapon." He looked at Walter. "Go back to your wife. Tell her the ghost of the canyon is gone. Tell Corian he has won. He has his land." "Coker, Walter started, his voice thick with guilt. "Go," Coker repeated, his voice gentle but firm. "You have a home to protect. A life. Do not throw it away for me." Walter Pike, a man broken by his own complicity, gave a single grief-stricken nod. He turned and began the long walk back toward the smoking valley, a man forever changed. Now they were alone, just the two of them on the roof of the world, with the rising sun painting their faces in gold. The wilderness stretched out before them, vast, beautiful, and unforgiving. "What will you do now?" Josephine asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I do not know," he admitted, looking down at his hands, then back at the endless expanse. "For the first time in my life, there is no place I have to be. No home to defend, no past to haunt me. It is empty." "It's not empty," she said, stepping closer. She reached out and for the first time placed her hand on his arm. The muscle beneath her palm was tense, hard as rock. "It's open." He looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. The carefully constructed walls he had lived behind his entire life began to crumble. The beast he had fought to control was not a creature of rage, but a creature of profound, aching loneliness. And it was not a beast at all. It was just a man. "Josephine," he breathed, his voice raw with emotion. He raised his other hand and gently, hesitantly, touched her cheek. His calloused fingers were surprisingly soft against her skin. In his touch, she felt the truth. His warning had never been about him losing control and violence. It had been about this, about him losing control of his heart, a heart he had guarded so fiercely for so long, because he never believed anyone would ever want it. "I am not afraid of you, Cocker," she whispered, leaning into his touch. A single tear traced a path through the soot on his cheek. "You should be," he whispered back. "I have nothing to offer you. No home, no name you can speak in a town. Only this." He gestured to the wild, open country around them. "My world had walls and ceilings and expectations," she said, her own eyes filling with tears. "It was a beautiful prison. This, this is freedom. She looked up at him, her love for him a fierce, undeniable truth in her heart. And I choose to be free with you. He searched her eyes, looking for any hint of doubt, any flicker of fear. He found none. He only saw his own reflection, his own loneliness, mirrored and healed in her steady gaze. With a sound that was half groan, half prayer, he lowered his head and finally, tenderly, kissed her. It was not a kiss of hunger or rage, as he had feared, but one of desperate, heartbreaking relief. It was the kiss of two outcasts, two survivors who had found their home not in a place, but in each other. The sun climbed higher, flooding the mesa with light. Below, the ashes of his past were cold. But here, in the arms of the city woman who had seen the man behind the giant, a new fire was kindled. They had no map, no destination, in a world that would hunt them. But for the first time in either of their lives, they were not alone. And as they stood together under the vast open sky, they knew their story was not over. It had just begun. That was the story of Josephine Beaumont and the Apache warrior Coker, a love forged in the heart of conflict and prejudice. Their journey was more than just a romance. It was a testament to the idea that home isn't always a place you can point to on a map. Sometimes it's the person who stands with you against the world, offering you a freedom you never knew was possible. The Wild West was full of stories of outlaws and heroes, but the most powerful tales are often the ones whispered by the wind in the canyons, stories of courage, sacrifice, and a love that refused to be broken. If their story touched your heart, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who loves a timeless tale of defiance and passion. And most importantly, if you want more stories that bring the forgotten corners of history to life, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Thank you for listening.